Before we get started, we wanted to let you know that this episode contains graphic medical descriptions of sexual organs and sexual health. If you're listening over speakers or with kids, you might want to listen later.
Welcome to Behavioral Grooves. My name is Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We are building a community of people interested in positively applying behavioral science to their work and life. We do this by having fun and engaging conversations with a wide variety of people. In this episode, we are continuing our series with Carnegie Mellon researchers and sharing a conversation we recorded with Professor Julie Downs.
Julie is an associate professor of psychology in the Social and Decision Sciences Department at Carnegie Mellon's Dietrich College, and she fits perfectly into the cross-disciplinary culture of that group. Her interests have spanned anthropology to healthcare to economics.
Our conversation with Julie was energizing and fascinating as we began by discussing something that Kurt and I are completely unfamiliar with: how to make the proper vaginal insertion of a dose of an HIV prevention drug. That said, we were totally engaged by the fact that the drug is extremely low cost, doesn't require refrigeration, and can be kept private in otherwise touchy situations with sexual partners.
The implications of that across the world are just amazing.
Yeah, tremendous.
We also discussed making decisions in an increasingly complex world of what to eat. Fast food is readily available, it's cheap and easy to acquire for a hungry family, and for many working parents, it's the easy thing to do. However, the calorie counters on fast food menus don't seem to have a positive effect on what gets ordered. Julie discusses some of the research on one way that this can be improved. Also, in our grooving session, Tim and I tackle the concept of friction and how that applies to product development and communications. And we talk about insights that we can take from a food ordering app that has a special calorie counter built into it and use those insights in our other work.
So sit back and enjoy another episode in our Carnegie Mellon series with Professor Julie Downs. Welcome, Julie Downs, to the Behavioral Grooves podcast.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
This is really exciting for us to be here at Carnegie Mellon. So this is just really fun. We're going to get started with a speed round.
Okay.
Monet or Michelangelo?
Michelangelo.
Bicycle or unicycle?
Oh, bicycle if I'm not going to fall.
Up the mountain or down the mountain?
Up the mountain.
Life without a mobile phone or without a laptop?
Laptop.
All right.
Okay. So
I would actually dig into the unicycle. Have you not ridden a unicycle lately? Come on, is that not just a normal Carnegie Mellon thing that all the professors do?
I'm more of a bicycle. I've bicycled across the Sahel Desert, which is not an easy place to bicycle across.
Which desert?
The Sahel. It's just north of the Sahara. No, it's just south of the Sahara.
So
it's near
in
the Sahara.
Africa. Yeah.
In Mali.
It's in Africa. Mm-hmm. Wow. You bicycled across it.
Do they have roads? I mean,
they have roads, but we weren't always on roads.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There was a portion on sand which was really not just pushing your bicycle across the sand, but sort of lifting it to get it over the sand. There were parts that were easier. There were some shorter days and longer days.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds fast. That could be a whole podcast
on its own. We could do a whole discussion about that, absolutely. But let's talk a little bit about your research.
Yeah.
So let's start with something that you're working on right now. What do you think is really engaging you in terms of some of the findings that you're seeing right now?
Well, right now, I've done a lot of stuff over the years on sexual behavior and sort of reducing sexual risk. And right now I have a project working with some medical researchers over at University of Pittsburgh who are developing a new technology for preventing HIV. Ooh. And it builds on, there's a drug called, the brand name is Truvada, it's called Oral Prep, which is a drug that somebody who's at high risk for HIV can take every day. And it's very, very effective at preventing HIV. But it's not, well, it's actually very expensive. It's FDA approved and insurance covers it. But it's, a lot of people don't really like to take a pill every day. And you have to start taking it for quite a few weeks before it's built up enough in your system to really offer protection.
Okay.
And so NIH wanted to develop a new technology that people could use on demand. So they're developing this film. It's for women, a vaginal film that you insert into the vagina.
It's
a film like a Listerine strip.
Oh, okay.
Not like camera film.
Right,
That'd be really
I'm sorry.
weird. That wouldn't work at all.
Yeah. Okay. So this strip, this little,
it's a little square, and you just fold it up and put it in, and it basically delivers the drug directly to the site of infection, the site of transmission. But it's a weird thing to do, right? Like these films exist for contraception. They actually don't work particularly well, but they're not very widely used even. Not only because they don't work that well, because it's a weird thing to do. And, people don't necessarily want to put this in there. You women would have to use our finger to insert it.
And it's daily? No.
It actually lasts for a week.
Oh, a week. Okay.
It lasts for a week, and you can, would stand up through multiple sexual exposures.
Okay.
And it works within 20 minutes of inserting. So it's much better than the couple of weeks that you would need to be taking a pill.
Yeah.
And the idea is you have someone who's not in a chronic high-risk situation. If you have somebody who, let's say, is married to or has a long-term partner who has HIV, they'll be taking this pill every day.
Right.
And that'll just be part of their daily routine. But if you have somebody who is not in that kind of chronic high-risk situation, but maybe they meet somebody, they don't know this person's status, if they have this film in their purse, then, they can just use it and then come back and go home with somebody and have protection. And it's so what they're developing this. So they're still sort of testing the technology, making sure it works, but the results are quite promising. It seems to be going very well. But my part is, how do you get women to use it?
Yes.
To use it correctly, to know it's in there, to trust it's in there. And some of our early work, we, the behavioral scientists, were sort of piggybacking on this clinical trial. So they have people testing this clinically, and then we were allowed to survey them immediately in the time between inserting this film and waiting 30 minutes for the clinician to come and make sure it's properly adhering to the mucosa where it's supposed to be. So they don't know if they've done it yet, and we talk to them, and they're not very good at knowing if they've done it right.
Oh.
So that's really...
That's
something we
tricky.
need to know.
Yeah.
And so those are the things. Right now, we're just, you said some early work. We're in the early phases of, all right, what is predicting whether they can do this correctly.
Yeah.
We created a little mini educational module, video module, to explain how it works, why it works. Because it turns out they have a lot of misconceptions about what it should be doing based on all the other things they know in the world, like a condom.
Right.
A condom prevents the, is a barrier that prevents the, any fluids from getting through. This is a medicine. And so if HIV in particular gets there, the medicine is going to sort of capture and fight HIV on the site. If it had a rip in this film, it wouldn't matter because the medicine is what's sort of forming the barrier.
Right.
But women get very concerned about if they have nails, are they going to rip this? And they have a lot of beliefs about this getting into the bloodstream and needing to come through the bloodstream the way many, many other medicines work. So because it works so differently from other medicines, a lot of people bring all their beliefs about how other medicines work to this very different acting medicine, and that can really undermine their beliefs. And they'll say that. They'll say, oh, like, would it still be working? How do I know? Where does it need to be? That'll sort of undermine a lot of their beliefs.
So their preconceived ideas are influencing how they're actually not only using it, but then responding to the potential, if it's working or not, and the angst that they're feeling as a result of that.
That's right, because they need to have confidence. If you're going to continue using it, if you don't have confidence in it, you'll stop using it. So they need to have confidence in it.
Yeah, Laurie Santos says, talks about the G.I. Joe fallacy. This knowing is not even close to half the battle. Like understanding what it's about and what it can do is not even the story. So how are you getting this information? How are you conducting the research? It sounds like you'd need to have a pretty in-depth conversation with someone to kind of get to this. It's not, just fill out this survey or jump on the web and answer these 10 questions.
That's right. Right now we're talking to people in person. We started off with this clinical sample who were using 4 separate films that were in development, and we were talking to them after each one, and they had different sizes or made of a different polymer base, so that we could sort of see how they felt. One of the big problems is it sticks to your finger when you do it, and it comes back out. So our medical experts are working on that side of it.
Thank goodness.
Now we've finished that study, and we've moved on to a study where we're trying to recruit people who are at kind of high risk for HIV, people who really would use this product in their regular lives. And so we're bringing them in and having very in-depth conversations. one of the limits to the first study was that women were actually inserting this film into their vagina. So we obviously couldn't observe how they did that.
Right.
As you can imagine.
Right.
So they would be behind a curtain, they would insert it, and then, we would survey them, interview them, the clinician would come, look, with a speculum to see where the film was, and often it was inserted incorrectly. So we had a big challenge that we want to see exactly what they're getting wrong. We could see in our data what predicted them getting it wrong, and we could identify a bunch of kind of reasonable predictors, like them feeling like it stuck to their finger, their background. We found, for example, that women who had never used tampons were a lot worse at this.
Oh.
And probably that relates to just lack of comfort level doing something like this.
Is age a factor in that as well?
Age was not. It was not a predictor.
Interesting.
We didn't have a huge sample in that, so we might not have been able to look at age as a predictor. But from what we saw, age wasn't a predictor, race wasn't a predictor. So what we are doing now, we wanted to be able to observe a behavior as close to the behavior of insertion as we could. So, and this actually was a recommendation from our NIH program officer. He said, there's this thing that you might not know about, and it's called, and you can edit this out if this is getting too much for your audience, it's called a fleshlight.
Okay.
F-L-E-S-H,
Correct.
a fleshlight.
So
okay.
when you get it in the box, so we now have ordered a couple of these and have charged them to our NIH grant.
Okay.
With our justification properly there. And you get it, it comes in a brown discrete packaging, and you open it up and it's like a black plastic flashlight, looks like a flashlight. And then when you take off the cover at the large end, it's actually a probably silicone model of female genitalia. And this is a product that was created for the adult film industry to help the male actors be ready for their scene. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
And this is
to be ready for.
I just want to
scene.
know the person who's approving the NIH budget on this, even with your explanation. That just would be an interesting. Yeah,
these turn out to be really quite affordable. So if we had to put them on another budget, but it's this is so what we have women do. We actually have this fleshlight and we duct tape it to the bottom of a chair, and we have women sit sort of perch on the edge of the chair so it close as we can get kind of physiologically to the location, and then we film them inserting it. Because we couldn't film them, of course, in the first study, inserting to their own vaginas. There's many reasons nobody would ever agree to that.
And they're aware of this?
Very much.
Yeah,
and we're sitting there with with an iPhone filming them. Yeah. And so we can see what they're doing, where are they trying to put it, do they understand physiological, anatomy well enough to know if you say insert this into your vagina, will they insert it inside, or would they kind of put it on the outside?
Well, is this a really high sensitivity to a specific region? Is this like...
Well, so here's the thing. It really gets back to people's baseline knowledge. We, in this country, do a pretty terrible job of educating people about things that we feel uncomfortable about. And one of those things is sexual reproductive organs.
Yep.
So the word vagina, people don't know which part of their anatomy is the vagina because it's actually only the inside part. A lot of people think that the entire genital region is the vagina. And so if they're told to put it in their vagina, they might just put it on the outside of the labia and think that that's their, not realize that that's
that doesn't
not,
work.
So that just comes down to basic knowledge, basic lack of knowledge, sort of the failure of sex education in our country. And because they don't know, and the people giving them this instruction are often highly trained educational professionals or medical professionals who would never occur to them that somebody doesn't know such a basic piece of information. But many people don't.
And so, as an outcome of this work, what are you hoping to then be able to do with it? Right? What is the ultimate benefit?
Yeah, so we're trying to get to the point, both informing the design of the product and informing some educational, I don't want to say like paraphernalia, but some educational accompaniments that will help people. How do you get
training
with a low
materials,
budget training materials? Because you don't want to have to bring people in and have them take a class. That's going to, just to insert this thing, that's going to defeat the entire purpose of having this low cost implement. But we can train the personnel who are dispensing it, and we can create video interventions. I'm a big believer in having a nice, tested, high fidelity video intervention that can just be on people's phones or the web or wherever, that people can just watch, and it can show them exactly what they need to know.
Exactly.
Because that a lot gets lost in translation when you start having educators teaching educators out in the field. Every little misconception that doesn't get caught can be,
Well, and as you
proliferated.
said, people even understanding their own anatomy and being able to use language that describes that can get lost in multitudes of translations in there. So
That's right.
visual.
We
component is
heard
it.
Toya Najayi at City Block Health in New York talk about dealing with women, especially in poorer neighborhoods. Almost all of them have been traumatized. And so to start to have a conversation with them about their health, like the very first barrier was get over need to deal with people who have been trauma victims. And so I just wonder, are there things like shame and lack of familiarity with just terminology? I would think that you're having to cross a lot of hurdles here, right? What are the biggest hurdles that you feel like you're needing to cross in this?
I think a lot of the biggest hurdle probably has to do with comfort level. One of our biggest predictors in that first study was just comfort level with your own body. And that this is something, a lot of women would say, well, I want an applicator. They're used to having an applicator for tampons and things like that. And so they don't really, even though it's unnecessary and it would add a big cost component that would make this piece of technology. And the cost level of this piece of technology, the difference is so great. I think a year's worth of the oral medication is something in the neighborhood of $60,000. And this film that can last a week costs about a dime.
Oh.
So a year is $5.
Wow.
Obviously that's just production. There'd be other costs involved, but the differential is multiple orders of magnitude. If you start adding an applicator, then that's going to increase the cost considerably, just because it's starting out so very cheap.
Right.
You imagine something so inexpensive could be distributed to huge numbers of the population at very low cost.
And
Yeah,
globally, where again,
It doesn't
they're never going to be able to, not never, multitudes of the population will never be able to afford the pill that you've
right.
talked
Well, I'm thinking
about.
of developing nations.
Yeah.
Correct. And there are actually a lot of foundations that are trying to take this pill into developing nations. But still, you could imagine just, scaling up so exponentially with something. And one of the big benefits is having this on-demand nature, that you have a film that doesn't have to be refrigerated. You can just have it at room temperature, and it's available. But if you don't feel comfortable using it, or if you're not using it correctly, I think one of our biggest challenges is actually going to be documenting, both for peace of mind and for efficacy, that the medication is where it needs to be. That's one of the things that's one of the problems we haven't solved yet.
Well, we talked with Sam Tatum, who actually works for Ogilvy, but they were doing this thing about working in a plant and people washing their hands, to the degree to do this. And
It was a food processing plant, so hand cleanliness was a big deal.
And what they ended up doing, again, their simple thing was a mark that they got before they washed their hands to actually then would disappear after. So it was visual, because otherwise people had different components of, well, I thought I washed fine, and different things. And I could see this being even, exponential in what you're talking about here. And I don't know if there's not a simple mark that you could do.
Yeah, I mean, that was really relying on social proof. Then everyone could see, and
This is not. Well, that's
there
the whole
won't be any
separate
social
thing.
proof in this. But it is amazing. I think what marvels us all the time is the number of simple interventions, like just finding the right twist on some of this, which is what you're looking for.
Like you were saying, there's different polymers and different components, and I'm sure there's probably some texture component that they can feel that are probably going to be different, and understanding how to convey that information. So anyway, we're making postulations here that we don't know anything about.
So just to kind of wrap up this part of the discussion, what's next in this study? What are some of the next things that you're advancing and working on?
So there's sort of a couple of directions to go. One is on the development side. Can we develop some sort of maybe an enzyme reaction that would truly would test? This idea of social proof is interesting because we almost have the flip side of that here, that this is something that women might want to be able to do without their partners knowing. Because, of course, asking a partner to use a condom, you might think, well, why, if you're bringing somebody home, why wouldn't you just use a condom? Well, that doesn't always go over so well. It doesn't always go over so well with partners. And getting back to the idea of trauma, when you have a lack of trust between partners, depending on what the relationship is, a woman bringing up using a condom with a partner that she has a complicated relationship with can even be dangerous for her because it evokes issues of trust, issues of lack of trust, issues of accusations or admissions. And so something that can just be done without knowledge of the partner, without affecting the partner, it can be a real positive.
Yeah. Wow, that is so cool. Can we look backwards now a little bit? And you've done a lot of, you've worked with people within the department. You've partnered with George and a variety of other people in the department. Is there any other kinds of interdisciplinary work that you've done that you might want to talk about?
Yeah, well, having brought up, one of my colleagues, we have a lot of economists in this department. It's a very fun place to work as a psychologist. Coming out of a very mainstream traditional psychology department, I learned a lot about how I saw the world as a psychologist, things that I never questioned. When I first started giving talks to this audience and people said, started raising their hands and asking questions that I'd never heard before, like, oh, I never thought I just do it this way. It never occurred to me to think about things any other way. And so that's been really fun. I've been here for a very long time at this point. But I've worked with some of my colleagues here. I work a lot with colleagues at the medical school. I work with some colleagues here, economists, on trying to, a lot of my work really centers around trying to help people make better decisions, help people reduce their risk, is really my kind of unifying factor. And one of the projects I've worked on with some of my colleagues here, the economists, is decisions about food, and especially pertaining back to policies that are put in place trying to help curb the obesity epidemic. Because, of course, the country spends a huge amount of money on the medical downstream consequences of an increasing rate of, the obese population, and is a little bit at a loss of what to do about it. So there have been a lot of policies put into place to try to change people's eating behavior and exercising behavior, because of course we know that eating healthier, eating more healthful food and exercising more is going to lower obesity rates, but it's really hard to get people to do that. And so policies, one of the big policies, of course, is identifying calorie labels
on the menus.
On menus.
Yeah.
Back in the 90s, it was putting it on packaged foods, and now it's putting it on menu items. And I think one of the things that's really interesting from my perspective and in these interdisciplinary collaborations is that the policy measures often spend less attention on the environment that people are in making these decisions. So we have our citizens living in this environment where fast food and packaged food and junk food is so readily available. And we have about 1,000 forces impinging on people to get them to consume this food that's terrible for them. It's cheap. It's super cheap.
Right. Per
calorie, it's incredibly cheap.
Yeah.
There's going to be downstream costs associated with the health, but we know from all our behavioral science literature that that's not affecting people's day-to-day decisions. And plus, any one candy bar you eat or any one,
Big
Mac you eat is not going to cost you a lot of money. It's eating that Big Mac 3 times a week for 20 years that's going to cost you a lot of money. Same with any one cigarette, right?
Yeah.
One cigarette is not what kills you. 10 cigarettes a day for 20 years is what kills you.
Yeah.
And so we have these forces that people are exposed to constantly that are pushing them down this road. Why do we have an increased obesity epidemic in this country? Well, it probably has a lot to do with this constant availability and, in fact, sort of pushing these very unhealthy foods on people and making it very hard for people to eat healthy. If you have a job, or you're taking your bus to two separate jobs, and you have children, and you're trying to feed them, and how are you going to make them some nice fresh vegetable dish with lean meats and whole grains? It's going to cost you an enormous amount of time and a fair amount of money. And for less money and considerably less time, you can swing through a drive-in on your way home and pick up food for the family.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to ask the individual person to fight against that just by putting numbers on that menu at KFC. That's gonna be enough to get the person. It's too much to ask of the consumer.
And putting those numbers out, did you find any? I mean, did it work? I'm assuming that, at least in my own opinion, in my N of one, I look at that.
Which is the most important N,
well, it
by the
always
way.
is, right? We're always self-centered in those components. But I look at that, and sometimes it works, but many times I'm going, no, I just want the Big Mac. I'm going to get the Big Mac regardless of it, because that's what I came in here to get. And so I don't know if you found anything with that.
So there's been a lot of research, our research, but also other people's research. A lot of people have been looking at this question. And at this point, because it's been a few years since some cities and states and municipalities rolled out these regulations, it's been a very fertile ground for testing. The big review studies that have been done so far suggest that you're not seeing a huge effect. You're certainly not seeing a nice, beautiful drop in how many calories the average consumer is consuming now that calorie labels are there. You are seeing pockets of progress, and this part is a little more tentative. There was a study that came out recently. It's just one study, but it looked at a sit-down restaurant as opposed to many, many studies have used fast food, because it's much easier to get a lot of people coming in and out of a fast food place. With a sit-down restaurant, I think it looks a little bit more encouraging. There might be some more movement, some more reduction. One of the things that you find when you look at the detailed studies is that people who are concerned about their health are very happy to have this information. And many people will cite using that information. They'll go into a restaurant and say, holy cow, I always bought this salad or this item, because this chicken sandwich, because I thought it was healthier than the burger.
Right.
But now that I see it's actually no healthier, I'll choose something else, or I'll go ahead and get the burger or whatever they'll do. So some people will actually appreciate that information. Those tend not to be the people who really need to change their behavior. So is it, transparency of information is a good thing? Should we offer people the information that they want? I don't think, I wouldn't argue against that. Certainly people in the industry will argue that there's a cost associated, and is it worth the cost? And I think that's an open question that people can answer. But it certainly doesn't seem to be a huge lever that is going to bring down the obesity levels. We're not seeing that. We are seeing a few pockets. So I mentioned that sit-down restaurant. That was another someone else's study. But we have a study where a series of studies we've been doing here looking at other ways of getting people to lower the calorie information. And one of the ways that we've looked is in online ordering. And online ordering of meals is becoming more and more common. Of course, you could go to a restaurant and go to their website and order. But even these days, there are aggregators, right? You can go to a website and choose of 50 restaurants and, figure out what you want. And all this is happening on the web. Mm-hmm. And because it's happening on the web, and because all this information is being collated, you can deliver people more fine-grained information, right? Rather than just say a Big Mac has 570 calories, you could say you've chosen a Big Mac and small fries and a Coke. And that's not a number I have at which is of course the point.
Whatever. Yeah,
right. That is 1,100 calories, let's just say. And then you might see that and think, ooh, 1,100 calories. What if instead of a Coke, I have a water? Oh, now it's only 850.
Okay.
Oh, that seems better. Maybe instead of fries, I'll have something else. You could imagine. And in fact, we have a study where we're looking at that exact thing. And so what people do is we give them an online platform and a menu. And they will get a little bit better just from having the calorie information there. But the thing that we're adding to this is, in addition to just numbers, because those numbers can be really overwhelming, it's a lot of information. How many calories should you eat for lunch? Do you know? No.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you know? You know how many calories I should eat for
lunch? Do you know how
lunch?
many calories you should eat? I don't even know how many calories I should eat, how many calories, much less how many calories someone else should eat.
Damn it.
But
hoping to learn something today.
but it's knowable.
Okay.
Right? Your doctor or a nutritionist, if you gave them, you said, I'm this tall, I weigh this much, I exercise this much, I want to lose weight, or I want to just maintain my weight. A nutritionist will tell you, oh, you should eat 650 and you should eat 750, right? They can give you those different numbers. So if that's all knowable information, surely we could put that into some sort of algorithm and give you that information. So that's what we're playing with. Can you give people a threshold and say, nice. So we just use this traffic light, right? So a green light, let's say you should, right now we just are using sort of standard cutoffs, but this is the obvious direction to go. Let's say you should eat no more than 700 calories for a lunch, or, maybe 850 would be okay, but that's a little high. So then anything up to 700 calories could be a green light.
Okay.
700 to 850 could be a yellow light, and anything above 850 could be a red light. So we've been playing with letting people go onto a platform, and what we find is that they'll choose a meal, and they'll see as they add items to their meal, they'll get a sandwich, they'll get some sort of side dish, they'll get a drink, maybe they'll also get a dessert, and that traffic light will change. And what we see is as people put their meal together, if they still have a green light traffic light, they're done. They say, okay, fine. If that changes to yellow or red, then they start swapping things out. Then they say, oh, maybe small fries instead of medium fries. Maybe I shouldn't get a Coke.
Yeah.
Maybe I should change to a salad instead of this bread, or whatever they're choosing. So they do respond very nicely to these thresholds. So now we have to work on making the thresholds a little more meaningful. But it's a much simpler way to get the information. Telling somebody 750, that's just too much.
And I think that goes, I've read some research where where I choose this salad instead of my burger, and then I feel justified that I can eat the brownie for dessert all of a sudden because, wow, I'm eating really healthier here, and so I'll make up for it here. And I can see where this now makes that more, it really takes this to the next level to say, yeah, but if you eat that brownie, you've now just gone up to over 1,000 calories, even with your more healthy main option. And this then helps in protecting that.
Yeah, and that brings up a question of sort of bracketing. Is the brownie included in this meal, and so we keep it under our, in our green light threshold, or do we do things in between meals? And so you could imagine we have such great tools and all this information available that you could imagine a world in which you had a sort of a smart app that was doing all this work for you. You certainly can now get an app and enter food in, and it'll count calories, it'll tell you things. Yep. But that's a lot of, I've used those in the past.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Why do I not continue? I used that for a couple months at a time in my life when I felt like I needed to lose some weight. I lost some weight, and then I stopped using it because
that's exactly the same. I did the exact same thing.
Yeah,
and you got into the routine and you did it. But then it just it's a lot every day, and you're going, do I got to really enter in that cereal this morning again? Mm-hmm. And yeah, you do, because it adds up over the day, and cumulative is the really important part. So
absolutely. Do you think we could talk a little bit about music?
Oh, of course you can.
I look at Kurt. Of course, the listeners can't see this, but I'm looking at Kurt because I'm always kind of curious as to what kind of glazing eye I'm going to get back. Is it going to be like, yes, we finally reached that part of the discussion where we get to talk about music? It's never like that, actually.
No, it is never like that.
It's actually never like that. But Julie, we do like to talk a little bit about music and about your musical interests and things that you listen to. So do you have a regular playlist that you wake up to in the morning, that you use on your commute? Tell us about your musical interests.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Right now I have small children, so I consider it an enormous victory that my children will listen to Beatles, Queen, what you
Duke
Ellington or something like that instead of Elmo. The fact that Elmo is not in my regular rotation is triumph. And I just have to keep the bar low. We have had Hamilton on kind of constant play for about 3 years at this point.
You and me both.
Yeah.
My kids will actually do Hamilton without the music on because they know the words, and so we say no, and they just start.
In the car recently.
They just do it, and they start singing in the back seat. You got Hamilton, I'll take Burr. I got Lafayette, and you take Washington's verse, and they go back and forth.
Yeah, it's pretty addictive. I mean, and now we've seen it. I saw it once without them. I saw it once with them. bringing a 4-year-old in to see Hamilton, I was a little risky, but it was no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. So if you had your druthers, what would just be? Let's imagine a crazy alternative universe where you
Someone took my kids for a weekend.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's right. You are home alone, and you get to choose what you're listening to. What's on your playlist?
Yeah, well, it's going to be embarrassingly uncurrent.
It's okay.
You're in with Tim all the time then.
Stop that.
Is it before 1978? Because then you and Tim can go together. And if it's after 78 to 89, then it's going to be me.
Yeah, because I would say my oldies are before 78, and my version of current is probably the 80s. Because that's when I stopped listening after that.
Okay.
I mean, the Beatles and this sort of just this what I consider just standard stuff. I mean, actually, a lot of trumpets like Louis Prima and Ella Fitzgerald and people like that. A lot of that is what gets in there. Yeah.
So you could actually bring Louis Prima to your kids through the Jungle Book, the original
My
Jungle Book.
kids actually do they like trumpets. They sort of go, oh, trumpets. So they love Louis Prima. We have just a couple of albums that have been sort of on loop over the years. Yeah. And then they have watched Jungle Book, and I've told them that's Louis Prima.
Oh, that's cool.
They're like, yeah, yeah.
I love it.
You gotta, you sneak it in however you can with those kids, and hopefully they take it up.
It just makes me giddy.
The one last question that we typically ask is there any one or two things for our listeners that you could say, you've done a lot of work in, obesity, sexual, preventing and teenage sex and all that kind of stuff. But just in average listener, one or two things that you would say, hey, just think about this and it might help you in having a better life or some better thing. Putting you on the spot here. That one or two or three top things from.
It's probably pretty easy to sum up like 20 years of research into two tips.
Yeah. Well, so if we're going to keep it basic, I can go back to as an undergraduate.
Yeah.
Because I changed majors a lot. I started out as pre-med, sort of biochemistry. I took some of those classes and they were fine, but not my passion. I switched to physical anthropology. I went to Africa. I studied with,
You rode a bike across, desert,
Rode a bike across the desert in Africa. I did a lot of those things. And actually I came back from that wanting to do something more about making people's lives better. And so I kind of came to decision science.
Yeah.
And one of the first things I learned studying early decision science as an undergraduate was what we call satisficing, which is essentially when you come to something that's good enough, stop looking. So you go to a restaurant, you open up that menu, you see something that looks good to you, close the menu and talk to the people you're at the restaurant with and have a nice time. And don't try to find the absolute best possible thing that might be on the menu because it doesn't really matter. And you're there to talk to your friends.
Yes.
Satisficers are happier.
Satisficers are happier.
I love that. Did you meet Maeve Leakey, by the way?
Mary Leakey?
Maeve.
Oh, I don't know Maeve Leakey.
Okay.
I did meet Richard Leakey.
Wow.
He signed his book for me, and I had a conversation with Mary Leakey, who's Louis Leakey's wife, Richard Leakey's mother.
Yeah.
But I left that world after that, so I don't know anything that's happened since then. Yeah, I had a little job in the museum measuring a tuberosity on primate ischia to compare it to some bone that they had found. So I, in there with my calipers measuring the ischia of various primates.
Way beyond the
podcast number 2.
Well, that's all I know. And then I switched. That was the end of my journey down that road.
Well, Julie, thanks so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. This is very, very fun.
Yeah, fun for us too. Thanks.
Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our behavioral group's interview, have a free-flowing discussion on some of those topics, and whatever else comes into our better decision-making brains.
That's where we're at. We're all about better decision-making.
At least I am.
And Julie's all about better decision-making to reduce risk.
To reduce risk?
Yeah.
I am at better decision-making to increase my risk. Oh, wait, no. That's not how that works.
Okay, so what do you want to groove on?
Well, I wanted to talk about, the study that she was doing in regards to the vaginal insertion and the components of how that applies, some of the insights of how they looked at that and how that applies to business, right?
Yeah, yep.
So the research way of how she's doing that and what some of the implications are for businesses, not on vaginal insertion necessarily, but just in general. And then making decisions about food. And again,
And the implications into product development.
yeah, and some of the research that she was doing on some of the apps and how the way that they're going about changing behavior from those apps maybe should be applied to things beyond just food consumption. So let's talk about some of those.
Definitely.
All right.
Okay, let's start with medicine. Like this whole idea that there are really great advances in medicine happening that are not going to get adopted because there's so much friction.
Well, because people don't have access, they aren't able to use it properly, they don't have the knowledge of how to use it, they might find that it's creepy or hard or difficult, but there's all these friction points.
Those are all frictions, absolutely.
And so in the corporate world, there are also friction points, right? And we have friction points within the organization with our customers, a variety of different things. What was interesting, what I found very interesting, and the part that I think is analogous to what we're talking about here. So Julie talked about, they couldn't tape the women actually inserting, the vaginal insert into their vagina.
Right. All kinds of trouble there. They're not going to go there.
Right.
No.
So they had to use a fill-in, and they used the fleshlight component.
Yeah, a prosthetic, basically.
Right. So how many times, in our world, we just make assumption, because she would have never learned some of the insights if they wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, big ahas came from that.
Big ahas. Just thinking about the information of, hey, some women don't even really understand what the vagina is, and so they're putting it on the outside versus, other things. And again, because she was so knowledgeable, that didn't really, knowing where the vagina is should be common knowledge.
And of course, the medical team that's developing it, they're experts as well.
How many times do we have experts creating our products, creating our communications, creating whatever it is that we're doing, and they're experts in that area, and they're trying to develop a product for people who are non-experts or develop communication for people who are non-experts.
Right. And I doubt that they're actually trying to use that they're trying to use words that indicate expertise. They're trying to use words that they believe that everyone would understand, but that's not always the case.
That's not always the case. I can tell you very specifically, we do a lot of work around communicating incentives, and we're working with the incentive team who are bright. They're super, super smart people, but they're also experts in that incentive plan. And when they're conveying it or trying to communicate it, they're telling me like, oh, this is really simple. There's 4 components, and this component is tiered at this part, and there's a kicker on this aspect. And all of a sudden I'm sitting there going, wait, time out. The people that you're communicating this to are not as expert on this. They haven't spent
they're not even as expert as you are, and you're getting buried.
And I'm getting confused, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to stop and just take a moment and say, where are the people that we're trying to influence? Where are they? And sometimes the friction that we just overlook because we've studied it so much or have so much knowledge about it isn't the case for those other people.
Yeah, there's a body of work looking at the degrees, the educational degrees of people in different levels of the organization that I found really interesting, because most managers, or there's a high degree of MBAs among managers,
right,
in big corporations. And the people that they're often communicating to are below them in the organization. And a lot of those people either just have undergraduate degrees or haven't completed an undergraduate degree, or might even just have a GED, high school diploma. And so what is normal and easy and comfortable for the MBA manager communicating to the masses.
Oh, particularly talking financial components, right? You're talking about, EBIT, all the other component, these acronyms and various different things. And we don't take into account they didn't go to 2 years of graduate school to learn about the finances of industry. And so we need to explain and understand, not only explain what those words mean, but the implications of what that is. And so that then parlays, I think, into this. So that was really interesting for me. I thought that was cool.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about decision-making around food.
Right. So the app that she talked about, right? So the interesting piece was putting calories up on the fast food billboards or, signages around what their food didn't really have that big of an impact.
They don't make a damn bit of difference.
Right. And particularly in the group that most needs it.
Right.
So knowledge, again, you brought up the G.I. Joe fallacy. Knowledge in and of itself isn't enough, right? So how do we change that? And then Julie was talking about this app that they're working with that was really fascinating because it took your let's order food in advance. And when you order that food, it will then combine your food components and give you the calorie total.
For the entire order, for everything in the shopping cart.
So I don't have to go, oh, that Big Mac is 500 calories, the fries are 300, and my soda is 170. So what's the math? 970, whatever.
Instantly too difficult to figure out.
Yeah, and I'm not going to do that when I'm doing that.
Do it.
But when the app does it, it's very simple. It's right there. The other aspect was interesting is then they put it into the stoplight component, right? But the stoplight for her was saying, look, let's take this and customize it. So we can put an algorithm in based on medical components of saying, yeah, you, Tim, at 5'10", right? 5'10" somewhere.
Oh, height.
Yeah. Your height and your body weight and everything.
Almost 5'11".
Yeah, whereas me, I'm 5'8", and all these different things, and activity levels probably all in there. But you could get an algorithm that says, oh, well, here is your optimal number of calories per day,
right.
And now that's optimal for breakfast, lunch, snacks, and dinner. And so you can get that. So all of a sudden you're going, oh, so my lunch I should eat under X amount of calories, but maybe I can push it because it's a special day, and I'm going, I really want to have those extra fries, and that's still in the yellow. That's okay. But when I get up into the red, I need to be concerned.
And this traffic light is such a great universal visual tool. In my product development days, did testing in India, Southeast Asia, Africa, Europe, North and South America. Traffic light is recognized around the whole world.
Well, and it's simple. So again, going back to the East model, right? It's easy. Right?
Yeah.
There's that attractiveness of the, I don't know if it's attractive, but.
Well, it is, right? It certainly can be.
Right.
Yeah.
You can make that visually appealing, right? So it's at least noticeable.
Yeah.
And then timely, right?
Certainly.
And then
I don't know if we'd make it social.
Don't know if you necessarily make it social, but from that perspective, that works.
Yeah.
But think about that. You talked about a little bit, what if your financial statement, right? If you had a budget.
Right. And there was an app tied to my debit card or my other credit card that I'm using, or all of my payment methods, so that it tracked everything would be really great to have sort of so far this week against your budget, you're in the green light. Looks like you're closer to the yellow. Forget it. You're in the red this week.
Right. And that gives you knowledge, but it is also in an easy to comprehend way. I don't have to add up. Oh wait, is my budget 2,000 this week? Is it 800 this week? What is it?
Too complicated.
And keep my math for me.
I do want to go back to. Did you say that there's an optimal budget for the number of calories you should have for snacks? Because I think that's something that I want to explore. That I want to figure out what my optimal budget for snacks is.
Well, the Oreos that you brought over today, we have definitely exceeded that.
Whatever the budget was.
Whatever that budget was, we are over that budget.
So there's another element in this app that we both find really interesting, and this is the temporal construal, this idea of using an online app to make choices about food we're going to be eating 45 minutes later or an hour later when it's actually delivered.
But it's the difference between being in a hot state and a cold state, right? So that component of saying, oh, yeah, well, in an hour or next week or whenever that is, hey, I would definitely choose the apples instead of the Oreos, But,
definitely.
But now it's here.
But that's for next week.
That's for next week. But
that's for an hour.
Today, the Oreos are very much here, and they're very tempting.
They're within reach, too. And
right.
The apples they're in a different room.
So again, making decisions for our future self, taking what our future self would be in line is often more beneficial for our long run than our immediate gratification monkey that kind of takes over.
So do you ever make decisions about your future self regarding music? Do you ever say, what I really need to listen to is this, and I'm going to set up sometime next week to go and listen to the new Depeche Mode record? Because I don't want to listen to it now. I'm going to listen to it next week.
I am an instant gratification monkey on my musical taste.
Yeah.
So I will know, because I get into the component, and have talked about this already. Flora Cash is my new kind of hot band that I really like. And I just have, indulged myself. It will be hedonic decline very, very quickly, I'm sure.
Well,
although the music's rather complex.
I think there's some complexity to Flora Cash.
So there you go. But there was that immediate kind of hedonic adaptation for them.
You got some sugar
and
on
I was like,
yeah.
going, oh, this is great. And I'm like digging into all their back stuff and various different things and constantly listening to it. But yeah, no, it's the instant gratification part, not the future self part going, I should listen to some Mozart next week.
Well, I was just wondering, do you ever,
I don't.
No, okay.
How about you?
No, I don't know. I don't think I do. No. I think I'm more of an instant gratification music guy as well.
I wonder if there's music,
anybody.
I wonder, music seems to be more of an instant gratification kind of component than a future component, unless you're learning it or some other element that it's going to be playing a part.
Do you ever look forward to listening to something? I mean, I remember in the days when I didn't have music with me all the time, that I only had music on a turntable in my home, that I would look forward to getting home and putting on, a particular record.
You're old.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
That's okay. I remember those days too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a difference of having constant access to it.
Yeah.
There is. And so now that instant gratification monkey gets satisfied a whole lot more. And I mean, you think about that with a number of things, right? Information, ability to communicate with people. I don't have to schedule. I remember my grandfather would call on Saturday mornings because weekends were cheaper. And that was the one time a week.
You're talking about the cost of the phone call.
Yeah, there was actual long distance costs back in the day where your local calls were covered with your monthly payment, but long distance calls were over and above, and they were cheaper after 9 at night or 7. And
wow, you're really old.
Yeah, and then on the weekends. And so my grandfather would call and talk to my dad on the weekends on Saturday morning, and that was an expected component. And you looked forward to it.
Yeah, and you'd anticipate that.
Today it would just be one of those things where, I'm going to call grandpa or I'm going to text grandpa or whatever it is. And so I don't know if you have that anticipation.
Well, with that, I want to thank the listeners for putting up with us for this crazy old guy discussion.
There you go.
And by the way, if you have enjoyed these discussions, especially the Carnegie Mellon series, please give us a good rating on the favorite podcatcher that you use.
Yeah, and recommend us to a friend, and we would love to hear from you if you have any suggestions or anything else. So with that, thank you.